Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Vinayak here and I welcome you all for this webinar. Today we are going to talk about ensuring smooth upgrade for HCL Traveler servers. This webinar is hosted by HCL Software Digital Solutions Organization. Next slide, please. Let me introduce the team. I'm the facilitator, and with me I have Aniket Salve and Mahavir Rajput, members from our support team as our speakers. I also have today our panel members, Lourdes, Charles, Timothy, Paul, Manish, Shrikant, Raj, Rajiv, and Ranjit. This session is being recorded. A note to all our participants, they would be on mute throughout the session. And for any questions, clarifications, please feel free to post them on the chat section. Our panel members would be more than happy to respond to them.
Thank you, Vinayak. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Intention of this webinar is to provide information on different considerations required when we are planning for Traveler server upgrade. Let's start with agenda. In this webinar, we will be introducing to what's new in Traveler 11.02 version, what are the Traveler server requirements, different considerations when planning for Traveler server upgrade, what are backup strategies and restoration in the event of upgrade failures. We will discuss about various upgrade scenarios, some known issues and how to fix it. And finally, we will open for Q&A and your valuable feedbacks. In the upcoming slide, we will talk about what are the new features and fixes in Traveler 11.02. Moving on to the next slide. Traveler 11.02 has added support for MySQL database for high availability along with DB2 and SQL. MySQL version 8.0.20 and higher of MySQL Community, Standard and Enterprise editions are supported. Traveler servers configured to use MySQL must be running on Domino 11 or higher version. Another important feature is support for updating the room reservation via Apple Calendar. With this, if any room is rescheduled or cancelled from device, then the rescheduling or cancelling of the room reservation will be done at Domino RNR database. In order for this feature to work, the device must be using Exchange ActiveSync version 16.0 or later protocol. However, there is a limited support for updating room information on calendar event. No support for resources yet. You can refer the Apple limitations and restrictions section at the product documentation mentioned on this slide. Traveler 11.02 also has the updated APNS certificate which has a validity till 7th November 2021. Moving on to the next slide. There are some bug fixes incorporated in this version. One important bug fix is about attachment is missing when synchronizing the MIME email that is not multi-part. If MIME email is constructed such a way that it is not multi-part but it has the MIME header and there are some files attached. In this scenario, Domino processes that email and from Notes client you will be able to see the email with attachment. However, Traveler does not sync the attachments to the mobile device. Hence on the device you will see the email but not the attachments. This has been fixed in this version. There are other fixes available in this version, which has been mentioned on this KB article mentioned on this slide. Moving on to the next slide, let's understand some Traveler server requirements. Traveler 1102 can be installed on Domino 901 or later release on Linux, Windows, and IBM i platform. However, on AX platform, Traveler 11.0 requires the Domino version 10 and later version. Also, you can upgrade to Traveler 11.02 from Traveler version 8.5.3 upgrade pack 2 or later version. For complete list of the system requirement, you can refer the KB article mentioned on this slide. About MySQL licensing, MySQL Community Edition requires no license to use as long as it is not distributed. However, Standard and Enterprise Edition will require license from Oracle and the support will receive from Oracle. In the upcoming slide, we will talking more on the Traveler upgrade considerations and overview. Moving on to the next slide. You can install the Traveler on any version of Domino it supports. However, we highly recommend you to be on the latest version of Domino level which you choose. For example, if you are planning to run a Traveler on Domino version 11, then you should have the Domino version 11.0.1 FP2, which is the latest level of that particular Domino version. In case you are planning to upgrade the Domino server version to major release, in that case, you need to rerun the Traveler setup again so that the Traveler binary matches the Domino level. For example, if you have a Traveler server 11.0.2 running on Domino 10.0.1 and you are upgrading the Domino version to 11.01 FP2, then you need to rerun the HCL Traveler 11.02 setup again after you are upgraded the Domino server version so that the binaries can match the Domino level. You can also always refer the system requirement article so that you are on supported operating system and Domino server levels. In case you are planning to upgrade both Domino version as well as Traveler server version, then first always plan for Domino server upgrade version and then you plan for Traveler server version upgrade. When you are performing silent install on pre-Domino 11 version, please make sure to modify the Domino program directory path at installer.properties file. The installer.properties file with silent install defaults to /opt/scl on Linux and AX. On pre-Domino 11 release, the default Domino directory path is /opt/ibm. In case in your environment you have a different path, then you need to update the installer.properties with the appropriate path. Moving on to the next slide. While working on the support case, we found that in some environment, the NTS underscore user underscore session parameter is set to false. Default value for this parameter is true. Traveler server accesses the user's mail file using the user identity when this parameter is set to true. Setting this parameter to false will lead the Traveler server to access the user mail file using server identity. This will have adverse impact when the calendar notices will be sent by the client. Hence, we always recommend you to keep this parameter to the default value, which is true. Also, all the servers in a Traveler HA pool should be at the same Domino level. Do not keep the one server in a HA pool on the Domino version 10.01 and another on 11.01. I can understand that This kind of scenario will be unavoidable when you are planning for Domino server upgrade. However, you can reduce the length of the time which you can run in a max environment. Same thing also applies for the Domino hotfixes. So make sure that whatever the Domino level and hotfix you are using for one server, keep the same thing for all the Traveler server in HA pool. Also, it is always best practice that you should maintain a pilot environment so that you can do your testing and upgrade migration scenarios before you actually go for the production environment. We will discuss about the upgrade scenarios for high availability environment in the upcoming slide. Moving on to the next slide. Always upgrade one server at a time in a HA pool. Complete the upgrade on that server fully, and once you confirm that server is upgraded successfully and functional, then only you should bring down another server for an upgrade. Performing the upgrade in this manner will ensure that the Traveler server service is available. Also, you should upgrade all the servers in HA pool in quick succession. Do not keep the servers in mixed environment like different server levels, different ES versions for long period of time. The impact of this is the load balance algorithm will overload the operated server. This has been done intentionally to give the best user experience. For example, if you are operated one server in a pool and which has some feature which is not available in the earlier version, so the user who is connected to that server won't be able to connect to the old server version. Also, all Traveler servers in a pool should be on the same Traveler version. There may be chances that for some reason you won't be able to upgrade the existing Traveler server because of some hardware or OS compatibility issues. In that case, you can set up another server and add that server in a pool and retire the old server. For more information on moving a Traveler to new server, you can refer the documentation mentioned on this slide. Moving on to the next slide. Another important consideration is about the schema update. So if you are planning to perform an automatic schema update, then the first server upgraded in HA pool will update the database schema as necessary. This will not affect your older servers in pool. So once the first server is upgraded and you are done the validation, you can bring down another server in HA pool for an upgrade. In case you are managing your schema manually, that is if nts underscore auto underscore db schema is set to false in the nodes.ini, in that case you need to perform some steps. Like first thing is you need to determine the current database schema version. You can run the tail traveler version command and you can check what is the current schema version. For example, on the traveler 10.0.1, you can find the schema version mentioned as 20180717. Next step will be to upgrade the first server in a Traveler HA pool. Once you are upgraded the server, in that you will find under the Domino directory path Traveler CFG and DB folder the Traveler SQL.zip or Traveler SQL.gz file, which you need to copy onto your SQL directory on enterprise database. Moving on to the next slide. Once you have copied the Traveler SQL file to the SQL directory on your enterprise database, then you can unzip or untar that file. After you unzip or untar that file, you will find that fixupnumber.sql files will be available in that folder. You need to open those files to check which file has the schema version which is current. So once you open that file, at the end of the file, you will find update lnt.schema version set max version equal to, and then there will be a schema version. For example, fixup32.sql file, you will find the schema version mentioned on this slide. So this file will be your first file which you need to execute. And after that, before executing, you need to open this file and you need to check whether the database name, schema name, and the path mentioned in this file are default to the existing database name or the schema name. If not, then you need to modify this file and the subsequent files. For example, fixup32.sql you will modify, then you will modify fixup33.sql, then you will modify fixup34.sql. Once you have modified all these files, then you need to execute this script. So in the next step, you can execute all the files in order. First fixup32.sql, then fixup33.sql, then fixup34.sql. The commands has been given on this slide. Moving on to the next slide. Once you have executed all the fixup SQL script, then you can proceed for upgrading the HCL Traveler servers. Next step is to run the appgrant.sql script, which is required to update any permissions for the newly added objects in the database. So the schema will update, so it might have some new objects. For that, the required permission will be set by this appgrant and grant.sql file. Final step is you need to run the verify indexed.sql so that it validates the index structure is correct or not. You can refer the updating the enterprise database URL mentioned on this slide for more information. In case you have set up your initial high availability configuration using DDL scripts, then at the time of upgradation, you can apply those DDL migration script for that particular release. After executing this DDL migration scripts, you need to run the appgrant.sql script. For example, let's say your current Traveler version is 10.0.1.2 and you are upgrading to 11.0.2. Then you need to run fixup33.sql, fixup34.sql, and then appgrant.sql script. In order to identify which script you need to run, you can refer the table1.migration script section at the documentation URL provided on this slide. We always recommend you to run the appgrant.sql script every time you execute this DDL migration script. Moving on to the next slide. In case you are switching from DDL to automatic schema migration method, in that case, the database administrator must configure the default Traveler DB login user, which is LNT user, with appropriate schema privileges to create, alter, drop tables, columns, primary keys, indexes, as well as grant the database alter permission. There are some ground rules which you should consider when you are planning for schema migration. HCL Traveler automatically migrates the schema to the latest level whenever it performs the upgrade, if that upgrade has the schema migration. This is basically because the NTS underscore auto underscore DB schema is set to true by default. In case you are managing it manually, then this parameter will be set to false. All the permissions which you have set initially for the DB user when you initially set up the high availability setup, the same permission will still required when you are operating in the high availability mode. If you are using the DDL method, the migration script for that particular release you need to apply it before you are starting the Traveler server. For automatic schema migration or the DDL method, whichever you choose, make sure the DB login user that you use to connect from Traveler server should have the proper permissions. You can refer the database permission documentation mentioned on this slide. In the upcoming slide, we will discuss about database schema in the Traveler 1102 and the new database index which is introduced in Traveler 1102. Moving on to the next slide. Traveler 1102 does not include any schema update. However, the previous Traveler release 11.0 does include the schema update. So in case you are upgrading from the older release to 11.02, then you need to take additional steps for schema upgradation. So in case you are manually managing your schema, then you need to perform the steps which we were discussing earlier slide. Also, Traveler 11.02 introduces a new database index. This index was added to prevent the duplicate entries in the ts_field_name table. On the first Traveler startup after upgrading to 11.02, a table repair action will be run to fix and remove the duplicate entries if they exist, and the new database index will be added. In case you are manually managing the schema, then in order to add this index, first thing is you need to run the verify indexes.sql script. Then you can start the Traveler server so that the table repair action will run and it will remove the duplicate entries and it will add the database index. In case it is not able to add those index, then you can again stop the Domino server and then run the verify indexes.sql script and then start the SQL server. Moving on to the next slide. Backup strategies and restoration. For standalone server, before upgrading the Traveler, you should make sure to have the entails db folder and lotus traveler.answer backup in place so that in case any issues while upgrading, you can restore the entails db folder and lotus traveler.nsf from the backup. For high availability environment, you should consult with your database administrator for the backup and the restoration strategy. I would recommend you to raise a support case in case you are facing any issues after upgradation. We will assist you to fix those issues. Now I will hand over to my colleague Mahavir to take you through the rest of the presentation. Mahavir, over to you.
Thank you, Aniket. In the upcoming slides, we will be talking more on the upgrade strategies or plans for your Traveler server. There might be different scenarios for your Traveler server upgrade, like upgrading the standalone Traveler server, upgrading Domino and Traveler server, or moving from standalone Traveler to high availability mode. We will talk about each scenario one by one to know that what are the recommended steps to make the upgrade successful. Moving on to next slide. First scenario is upgrading the standalone server version from one release to another or to the latest release. Here we need to follow some simple steps like shut down your Domino server and then run the installer of Traveler. Follow the on-screen display to complete the installation on Windows. For Linux or AX, run the silent installer to upgrade it to the new release. If there is need to modify the installer.property as explained in earlier slide, please do that. Post installation of Traveler server, start the Domino server and wait for some time as Traveler server will be busy in updating the tables in NTSTB. Once completed, then it will load Traveler task and HTTP task on Domino server. Monitor the server for a while and check if the devices are syncing properly. Second scenario is if both Domino and Traveler server version needs to be upgraded. In this scenario, first we need to upgrade the Domino server version and then upgrade the Traveler server version. Shut down the Domino application. Remove the Traveler task from server task list in notes.ini. This is required so that there won't be any error on the console due to mismatch of the version after Domino server upgrade. Upgrade the Domino server and complete all the migration tasks if any required. Shut down Domino application. Now install the HCL Traveler server. Traveler server setup will add the Traveler task in server task list. Now start the Domino application and HCL Traveler task will be loaded. Moving on to next slide. Next scenario is to migrate from Derby to enterprise database. You can migrate from Derby to high availability mode with supported enterprise database like DB2, SQL, and MySQL. You can refer the documentation link mentioned on this slide. Here we will discuss about Derby to MySQL migration, as MySQL support is the newly added in Traveler 11.0.2 version. However, steps will be similar for DB2 and SQL migration, except some commands will be specific for DB2 and SQL standpoints. First, take the backup of NTSDB folder and Lotus Traveler.nsf database. Shut down the Domino application on the server. Install the MySQL server. Although it is possible to deploy MySQL server together with HCL Traveler server, but it is not recommended. DB2, SQL, or MySQL should be deployed on its own server. And the server should be a 64-bit system. The database server and Traveler server should be in the same time zone, and their system clocks should be synchronized. Copy the connector that matches the MySQL version you have installed under Domino program directory /traveler/lib path. On this slide, you can find the URL for downloading the MySQL connector. MySQL JDBC required Domino 11 or higher version as it needs the OpenJDK 1.8. Prior Domino version with IBM JDK do not work with MySQL connector or JDBC driver. Moving on to next slide. Next step is to set lower underscore case underscore table underscore names equal to 1 in MySQL configuration file or at the time of MySQL server installation. This needs to be done after installing MySQL and before you start the MySQL server for first time. Traveler will work without this setting, but it is generally recommended by MySQL, moreover for MySQL on Linux. Start MySQL command line and create database, DB login, user, and grant minimum permission required. You can refer to the commands mentioned on this slide. Other option is to use DDL method. You can refer the section Configure MySQL for HCL Traveler using DDL at the documentation URL provided on this slide. Moving on to next slide. Now open command prompt on the Traveler server and switch to Traveler util folder path and run the command shown on this slide. Once the command is executed, it will ask for jar file location. Enter the jar file path, which is nothing but the connector file path. Moving on to next slide. There is non-bug with MySQL connector, mostly on Linux MySQL. It throws the error message shown on this slide. Workaround is to provide the correct time zone on the command line as shown on this slide. Best practice is to have the database server on same time zone as Traveler server. Moving on to next slide. Now restart the MySQL server on Traveler server. Set the auto schema upgrade to true via nts_auto_db schema equal to true notes.ini file if it is set to false. Default value is true only for this parameter. Start the Domino application and you will see on the console the database is migrated to MySQL with message transfer has completed successfully. Traveler will now start in HADR mode. Traveler does not support MySQL cluster and other active configuration. Traveler only support Derby to MySQL migration path. In the upcoming slides, we will discuss about some known issues and how to fix it. Moving on to next slide. In an environment, it was observed that Traveler 10.0.1.0 installed on Domino version 9.0.1 fixpack 9. Domino server version was upgraded to 10.0.1 version. Post upgradation, it was found that all the devices were not able to connect. On console, SSL handshake error messages were found as shown on this slide. With Domino 10.0.1 version, SSL cipher suite is no longer controlled via notes.ini. You must select the ciphers that you wish to enable for each server via server document, or if any internet site document created for Domino server. After selecting the cipher suite from server document and restarting the server, devices were able to connect. You can refer the documentation related to cipher configuration mentioned on this slide. Moving on to next slide. Another issue reported was after Traveler server upgraded to 11.0.1.1. Users were not able to send the emails in a scenario where NTS_user_session parameter was set to true. If NTS_user_session parameter is set to false, the users were able to send email. Issue was observed both on HCL Works application and iOS native mail application. In this case, it was found that on new server, multiple mail.boxes were created, and end users were not having the permission to write into newly created mailboxes. Once recreating the mailboxes on server, users were able to send emails. Moving on to next slide. In another case, Traveler version 10.0.1.1 installed on Domino 9.0.1 fixpack 10 version on iSeries system. Domino server was upgraded to version 10.0.1. After Domino 10.0.1 upgrade, users were not able to connect to the devices and also not able to access webmail due to certificate not available. In this case, it was observed that certificate was available on the server, but server was not able to recognize the certificate. In order to fix this issue, certificate name on the server document was cross-checked and we found that certificate name was correct. Edited the server document and saved without any changes. After restarting the server, users were able to connect to the devices and also able to access webmail. Moving on to next slide. In this slide, we have given the reference which will be helpful during Traveler server upgrade. Also, we would suggest you all to subscribe HCL Software and HCL Software Support YouTube channel. It has very helpful videos on HCL Software products. We will be adding more videos related to the Traveler upgrade as well. Thank you. We are now open for Q&A and your valuable feedbacks.
Hey, thank you, Mahavir, and thank you, Aniket. I would request Lourdes to, if there have been questions put on the chat, if we can, respond to, so that all of us can, hear that out.
Thank you, Vikas, but it will be Tim that will answer those.
Yes, hi, this is Tim. We had a few questions about the difference with Derby and MySQL, and I'll just provide some clarifications here. Derby is still supported, so if you do a new install, Derby is the database that it uses. And a clarification there is, if you just only have one server, you can still configure to an enterprise database, including MySQL or DB2 or SQL Server. So that is a valid configuration, but if you're configuring so there's some benefits with just configuring an enterprise database. You will remove some of the processing off of the Traveler server that's done by the database server. But the full power of using an enterprise database is that when you configure a high availability pool with multiple Traveler servers, that will give you some high availability if one of your Traveler servers is down for maintenance or just an issue with the network or something like that. So that's one of the main reasons for configuring to enterprise database. And I think that really summarizes the questions that we had. So if there's any more questions, you could post it in the question box. There was another question about, do you plan to work with Verse Apple with 2 boxes? I'm not sure what that question really means. The HCL Verse clients work against Traveler in an HA configuration. I don't know if that was the question.
Hi, Tim. I think the question meaning that if the multiple accounts can be configured in the same, we have a enhancement request for this. I mean, if they intended that if the multiple account can be configured on the HCL WhatsApp on Apple, then currently we cannot configure multiple accounts.
This is Curtis. So that's still a limitation. The Verse on iOS app or the Verse on Android app do not allow multiple accounts. There is a idea in the AHA site, so I encourage you to vote for that if you think that that's an important addition.
Okay, so please note, we will be shortly publishing a knowledge article wherein we will have the presentation, the recording, and the Q&A transcript, so that it can be referred by all our customers. Okay, if there are no more further questions, I'd like to thank everyone for their time, for joining this session. And we will meet you again in our upcoming webinars. Till then, thank you. Good day. Bye-bye.